Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. Let me know if you can hear me or not. And we're going to be discussing May June 2025 Section C today. And we'll discuss the important question from Section C. I mean, the question that students usually found confusing. That is question number 5. So let me know if you're all there, and I would want you all to share this particular YouTube live stream with your peers, especially those who are appearing in October, November, whether as a first time or as a retake, so that we can start. Okay, so the first question, the first question that came in the June 2025, question number 5, section C, was with the help of a diagram explain two ways in which a fall in the balance of trade in goods may affect the value of the floating exchange rate, and consider the extent to which. So like I said, always break down the question into 2-3 parts. So firstly, they are saying with the help of a diagram, and whenever they're asking you to draw a diagram, so you have to draw a diagram because that's where the marks are given. And these diagram marks, whenever an 8 marker question, they ask you to draw a diagram and explain. So these are the knowledge and understanding marks, AO1 marks, because that forms part of AO1, especially when they specifically ask you to draw a diagram and then explain. Explain two ways in which a fall in the balance of trade may affect the value of the floating exchange rate, and consider the extent to which a change in the relative interest rate between two countries. Relative interest rates means interest rates in comparison between, let's say, country A and country B, may have a greater impact on the exchange rate. Okay, now guys, remember that whenever you hear the word something that has to do with change, it says and change, or whether it says affect. So it could be something that could increase or decrease, or it could have a positive negative effect both. So make sure that you're explaining both. So usually students did mention so affect could be both ways, right? Could be increasing or decreasing, and positive or negative both, right? And consider the extent to which a change, similarly a change could be either up in the up direction or in the downward direction. So you need to identify which change is applicable over here. So you start off by defining what a floating exchange rate you'll start off by defining what the balance of trade is. So you'll say that the question is saying explain two ways in which a fall in the balance of trade may affect the value of the floating exchange rate, right? That is what the question is saying. So in a floating exchange rate system, we know that the value of the exchange rate is basically determined by the demand for and supply of the currency in the foreign exchange market. That is, a change in the demand and supply of the currency always influences the exchange rate in the forex market, right? So it could either cause an appreciation or the depreciation of the currency. So that's the first line that you will write, and then you will also define balance of trade. The reason why you also define balance of trade is because you need to first list down the definitions of the topics that are being tested in your question. So balance of trade refers to the difference between, we know what a balance of trade is, the difference between your exports, the value of your country's exports and imports. And since the question is talking about a fall in the balance of trade, so you'll tell what a fall in the balance of trade means. You'll say that a fall in the balance of trade could either mean a fall in surplus or a rise in balance of trade deficit. So fall in the BOT could either mean a fall in surplus or it could mean a rise in deficit. And this could happen due to either a rise in imports, or it could happen due to a fall in exports. So a balance of trade measures how much it's the net balance of your exports and imports. So falling balance of trade could either be your imports rising or your exports falling, right? So you will show two diagrams. First diagram, so here I've taken pounds and dollars. So I've taken the price of pounds and dollars on the y-axis and the quantity of the pounds. So I'm reflecting the price of pound in dollars. You don't need to show the numbers here. Just show E1, E2. You draw the demand supply diagrams, the demand for pound, supply of pound. You show that the exchange rate is E1, and a rise in the supply of the pound would cause the pound to depreciate, will cause a depreciation of the pound. But you need to explain why, because the question is saying with the help of a diagram, explain two ways in which a fall in the balance of trade may affect the value of the exchange rate. So balance of trade could fall either because exports are falling or imports are rising. So we need to and that would affect the demand and the supply. So let's say what happens when the imports are rising. So the supply of the currency will rise in that case. So you draw the diagram, and then you say that diagram 1 shows the exchange rate of British pounds against dollars. You say that a rise in the imports by the UK residents, and residents could mean households, government, or firms, by the UK residents would mean that your residents are selling more domestic currency. So because your residents are importing more, so they're selling more of the domestic currency to buy the foreign currency. So they're selling more pounds to buy dollars, let's say. And this would shift the supply of pounds or domestic currency to the right from S1 to S2, causing the pound to depreciate. So that is one reason that you've given. The second diagram that you need to make was about falling exports, because a balance of trade is falling means that it's deteriorating. It could either be due to a fall in exports or a rise in imports. So rise in imports, you've explained it. Now you'll explain it through a fall in exports. So you'll say that diagram 2 shows the currency depreciating due to a fall in currency demand in the forex market, causing the demand for pounds to shift to the left to D2, from D1 to D2, causing the exchange rate to fall from E1 to E2, right? And why this could happen? This could happen because your exports are falling, and because your exports are falling, so the demand for the currency will fall, obviously. Because the foreign residents, you just need to give an explanation slightly that the foreign residents will obviously buy fewer domestic goods from the UK, and as a result of this, what will happen is that the demand for your pounds will go down. That's what you had to explain. So the fact that you've explained this through the diagram, that explained two ways in which a fall in the balance of trade may affect the value of the floating exchange rate. So basically what you're explaining is that a fall in the balance of trade will cause the currency to depreciate, and how will it cause the currency to depreciate? Basically, you've explained it through the diagram, right? Now the second part of the question is important, which students really found confusing, was that the question says that consider the extent to which a change in the relative rate of interest may have a greater impact on the exchange rate. So when could a relative interest rate change have an impact on the exchange rate, and whether it will have a greater impact or not, and when, in what case? You need to have a precise judgment on this, right? So in this case, what you had to say was that, so relative interest rate between two countries, like country A, country B, right? So let's say if the country A's interest rate is more than country B's interest rates, so will that have an impact more on the exchange rate? Or, so basically what they're saying is that you need to compare the fact that whether an interest rate change could have a more impact on exchange rate rather than a balance of trade. So let's assume that a country, USA, let's say USA. Now, dollar is very strong, right? Dollar is a strong currency. And the reason why dollar is so strong, despite the fact that USA, America, imports so much against a lot of countries, is because there's a lot of investment that goes in the USA, be it FDI, be it financial flows, whatever, right? So it obviously makes the currency stronger. So what we're saying is that, yes, even if a country is importing a lot, the currency depreciates, as we can see in the diagram. Whether you're importing more, so your currency depreciates as shown in diagram 1, or maybe if your exports fall, your currency depreciates, but still interest rates could have a much larger impact. And this is exactly what the question is asking you, that consider the extent to which a change in the relative rate of interest between two countries may have a greater impact on the exchange rate. Guys, are you all listening? Whoever is watching the stream right now, do you understand what the question is asking me? Please let me know in the comments. Also share the stream with all your friends who are appearing as a retake in economics and who are appearing for October, November in the first time. So let me know if you guys are listening to this. So so basically what you had to tell was that you need to talk about the extent to which a change in the relative rate of interest between two countries may have a greater impact on the exchange rate. Now, like I said, despite the fact, okay, thank you, Khadija and Rohil, please share the streams as well. Now, basically, you have to understand that despite the fact that a country is having a balance of trade deficit, and that will put a downward pressure on the exchange rate, the currency will depreciate. Just like I gave the US example, USA imports a lot, but still it manages to sort of have a strong currency because of other factors that have a stronger impact on USA's currency. That has to do with the people, USA attracting a lot of investment, be it financial investment or be in the form of hot money inflows or financial flows, or maybe in the form of FDI. So what you had to talk about over here is that you will say that a change in the relative interest rate between countries may exert a strong effect. It does have a strong effect, right? Higher domestic interest. First, you need to talk about how will it have that effect. So you'll say that higher domestic interest rates attract hot money inflows, right? Because foreign residents may want to move their savings in domestic banks. So people would want to save money in other countries because of higher domestic interest rates over there, which will increase the demand for the currency and it will appreciate the currency. See, the question is asking you, may have a greater impact on the exchange rate. See, balance of trade going down, falling. A falling balance of trade may have a depreciating impact on the exchange rate, right? But let's say a rise in the interest rates may have an rising impact on the exchange rate. The exchange rate may appreciate instead of going down. So they work in opposite directions. The question hasn't really specified that in what direction we're talking about a relative interest rate to change, but obviously we can conclude intuitively that they're asking us that what will have a greater impact, whether it is balance of trade could have a greater impact or the interest rates could have a greater impact. And so we actually have to compare in this question. So what you say is that on the other hand, a low relative interest rate may cause hot money outflows and it may cause currency depreciation. But what you need to talk about is that these hot money inflows are basically called financial flows. They appear in the financial account of the BOP. So these financial flows are often much larger and they are faster. They're much larger and they're much faster means that they're very faster means that in an instant you can move money from one country to the other, right? So they're much faster and they're much larger in terms of moving money here and there as compared to the trade flows, which are relatively slower, you can say. So interest rate changes. So in this case, in this context, you can say that interest rate changes may dominate the exchange rate movements. So interest rate changes may have a larger impact on the exchange rate movements as compared to the trade flows. Yes, trade flows will have an impact, but for instance, it takes time for countries to enter into contracts and then actually the trade to take place. But financial flows happen very quickly in the spur of a moment, and they're very volatile as well. They can either go up or go down. So in that context, even if exports are going up, but if the interest rates goes down, then probably a lot of people might pull back the money because interest rate changes result in volatile impacts. Volatile impact means sudden movements, ups and downs, right? So interest rate changes may dominate the exchange rate movements in that context. However, this may depend upon the economic confidence and stability in that country, as foreign investors would only move in their money if and only if they're confident that their financial investments would seek good returns. Now, what I mean to say over here is, for example, look at the country of USA. Now, USA imports a lot, but then the fact that in USA, just a second. In the USA, is it fine now? Guys, Khadija, is it fine? In the USA, okay, so I was here. I'm saying that in the USA is basically a country that imports a lot, but still it is managing its exchange rate because the fact that people are very much economically confident in the country because the country attracts a lot of investments and there's more economic stability compared to other countries. So what you're saying is that a high interest rate may result in an appreciating currency despite the fact that the balance of trade of that country might be falling. So that country's balance of trade might be deteriorating, but still the exchange rate might not deteriorate because a high relative interest rate may offset that. But then in evaluation, you will talk about that this will depend upon the fact, this depends on the economic confidence and stability of the country. Because if a country has a stable economic system and foreign investors are confident about investing in that country and see good returns, then an increase in interest rate would definitely cause the currency to appreciate despite the fact that that country might have a deficit on the current account or a deficit on the balance of trade. So for instance, a fall in the balance of trade due to a rise in demand for imports may exert downward pressure on the exchange rate. Obviously, if you're importing more, it may exert a downward pressure on the exchange rate, but the effect may be offset. Look what I've written. But the effect may be offset by a rise in relative interest rates if the country has economic stability and high investor confidence. So despite the fact that a country might have a negative balance on the balance of trade because it's importing a lot, despite being a major importer and having a current account deficit and a balance of trade deficit, it might not exert a downward pressure on the exchange rate because a high relative interest rate accompanied with investor confidence and economic stability may offset that impact. Rohil Basir, is that clear? Khatija, is that clear? And that was exactly what the question was asking, that and consider the extent to which a change in the relative interest rate between two countries may have a greater impact on the exchange rate. So the extent, yes, it will have a greater impact on exchange rate, especially considering that your country has economic stability and the country's investor confidence is also high. In the end, you will write a conclusion. You will say that to conclude, a trade deficit or a fall in the balance of trade tends to weaken the currency. Yes, we know that it tends to weaken the currency. It depreciates the currency in a floating exchange rate system. But in practice, interest rate differences, right, may usually have a greater short-term impact. They have a greater impact, but more short-term. By the way, a longer term impact on the exchange rate has to come from the balance of trade, export and imports, because obviously that will have a more, because that obviously will represent a lot of, it speaks a lot about the country's structural issues as well. For example, if a country is importing more, why is it importing more? Because maybe it has a lot of inflation. Maybe it doesn't have those goods available. Maybe it has a poor manufacturing. So there are more imports and poor exports. So there's a consistent balance of trade deficit. So over the long term, yes. Balance of trade movements or balance of trade deficits will have a much stronger impact on the exchange rate. Over the long term, yes, it will have. But over the short term, these relative interest rate movements might have a more immediate impact, short term to immediate impact on the exchange rate due to scale. Scale means that these financial flows that is the movement of financial capital from country A to country B and pulling money out from one country's bank and putting in some other country's bank as savings. These are called financial investments or financial flows. They are very volatile. That immediately, what really happens is that the moment, let's say in Pakistan, if Pakistan suffers from economic instability, foreign investors would start pulling out money from Pakistan immediately in large volumes. That's why I remember teaching this in my courses. That's why a balance of payment crisis happens, right? So that's why I'm saying that interest rate differences might have a greater short-term impact due to scale and volatility. Volatility का मतलब होता है, guys, कि immediate sudden movements are. Suddenly something could go up, suddenly something could go down. Due to scale and volatility of capital flows, leaving the exchange rate either stable or even stronger. So yes, a balance of trade deficit can make the currency weak over the long term, but interest rate differences will have a stronger short-term effect because of scale and volatility of capital flows, which will either leave the exchange rate either stable over the short term or maybe even stronger over the short term. ये है economic thinking. Yeah, this is what you will never get to learn from the notes that you all end up studying. This will only happen when you have these good discussions between people who really have an interest in the subject and they're actually willing to. So you need to have that mindset basically, and you can't be expected to have that mindset from day one. This is a skill that develops over time. But the more you practice, the stronger it gets. But obviously, you don't have to get a perfect score in you don't have to get a 60 on 60. You getting somewhere more than 30 is still good, as you'll still end up with an A with something, right? So you don't need to be perfect. The reason why we're having so many C's or something because students are not able to write properly. Whatever they write it in the analysis and the evaluation and everything that has to do with the answer is weak, and they're not answering the question. This is what you had to answer, unless and until. So let's say you write a whole thesis on exchange rate, you know everything about exchange rates and current account, but if you're not able to provide this reasoning, or if you're not able to provide in the conclusion, you have to make a judgment. You have to tell your judgment has to be precise. For instance, over here I took a stance. My stance was that in the short term, interest rate changes might dominate. But that's a stance. But then the stance has to be provided with clear backing. That why am I saying this? And I'm not saying interest rate changes will always dominate. I'm saying balance of trade changes will dominate over the long term. Got it? So the next question, assess whether an improvement in the terms of trade or assess whether an improvement in the terms of trade or a surplus on the current account. So they're saying they're saying improvement in the terms of trade or a surplus on the current account is of more benefit to an economy. Remember that whenever they are talking about two different economic indicators, see, improvement in terms of trade is an economic indicator, surplus of a current account is an economic indicator. So you have economic indicator number one, you have economic indicator number two, and they're saying that which one is more beneficial, which means that both have benefits. But then the problem is that both have negative consequences as well. So whenever they're asking you to compare two things, whether it is two policies, whether it is monetary fiscal, supply side monetary, whatever, or it is a comparison between subsidies, taxes, or minimum prices, or subsidies, or whatever, or information provision, advertising, whenever something has to be compared and they're asking you which is more beneficial or which is more effective or whether it is not or something like that, you always have to mention the pros and cons or the advantages and disadvantages of both the things, whether these are policies or indicators or right, of both the things under analysis AO2. Got it? Understood? So what you will say is, theek hai? Understood? So what you will say is, guys, that you will start off your answer by saying that the terms of trade basically measure. So this is the question. The question is simply asking you that which is more beneficial. Is terms of trade improvement more beneficial, or they're asking you is terms of trade or the current account surplus more beneficial? So in the end, we will talk that which is more beneficial, but that would happen in the end. But first, in the analysis, you will talk about the pros and cons of both an improvement and a current account surplus. Now, the thing is that let's say a student mentions an improvement in terms of trade ke benefits, and he also mentions improvement in surplus benefits, current account surplus benefits. But he does not mention the drawbacks. And he provides a correct conclusion and a correct evaluation. He will get 0 out of 4 still, because he has not provided the drawbacks. So remember, whenever a comparison between two policies a comparison between two economic indicators so for example, if they ask you whether deflation is more harmful or unemployment is more harmful, or whether unemployment is more harmful or a current account deficit is more harmful, whether a deterioration in the terms of trade is more harmful or a current account deficit is more harmful, even then you have to talk about the harmfulness of current account deficit and the harmfulness of terms of trade, or the harmfulness of unemployment, or the harmfulness of let's say deflation or recession, whatever the question is. And then you also have to talk about the positive consequences. So you have to give both sides in the analysis. Those both sides could be the drawbacks and the pros and the limitations and the advantages. Got it? Understood, everyone? Otherwise, you will not get marks for evaluation. So what you will say is that you'll start off by defining terms of trade. That terms of trade measure the relative price of exports to imports. And the formula for terms of trade is that you give... Now, again, see, for instance, when I was checking this attempt, a student had not given the formula for terms of trade. So will we not give him good marks? No. This is level-based marking. Just because you missed out a formula, but you wrote a very good answer on this question, you will still get very good marks. So level-based marking, what happens in a level-based marking is that it is judged on an overall level and not just focused on, oh, you know what, the student didn't give the formula for terms of trade to penalize the marks. It doesn't work that way. Okay? But still you have to give some information on TOT. So for instance, if I just would have said the terms of trade measure the relative price of imports and exports, and then I would have went on answering the whole question correctly, I would have still gotten marks. But then it's best that you provide whatever you know in small bits and pieces on terms of trade, some basic information relevant to the question. Also, guys, at any point when you will see that I have not deviated from the question, you have to answer the question. Provide information only that is relevant to the question. Even if whatever you are providing information is correct but not relevant, you will not get the marks. The terms of trade measures the relative prices of exports to imports. Terms of trade, you know what the formula is: index of average export prices over import prices. It's an index. The multiplier by 100 is not a percentage. It is converting the ratio of export to import prices to an index number. Terms of trade improves. Now, since they were asking about an improvement in terms of trade, so you will say that terms of trade improves when export prices rise relatively more than import prices, or maybe it can improve due to a fall in import prices. So if the import prices fall or export prices rise more than import prices. So an improvement in terms of trade means, then you need to tell, this is an important line. An improvement in terms of trade means that a country's exports can now buy more imports. This is what an improvement in terms of trade means. That your basket of exports can now buy, the same basket of exports can now buy more imports, which is good. So on the other hand, the current account, you'll say that the current account records the trade and goods and services, plus it records the net income and transfers, and you will talk about what a surplus on current account means. You will say that a surplus on current account means that inflows exceed your outflows, but also a surplus on the current account, by the way, a surplus on the current account is primarily caused due to a balance of trade surplus where exports exceed imports. So a surplus on the current account is primarily caused due to a balance of trade surplus where your exports exceed your imports, right? This is again assessment objective 1 that you're providing. So you provide the basic definitions and everything. But again, see here, it's not only about the definitions. It's about providing that knowledge which is so I didn't focus on current account deficit here. I focus on current account surplus, what defined it, why is it caused. I focus on terms of trade improvement, defining it, what happens when it improves, and why that improvement occurs. I didn't talk about terms of trade deterioration. It wasn't needed. Let's say if you would have written it, the examiner would have annotated seen. Seen means he has read it, it's correct, but he's not gonna, it's not worthy of a mark. Okay? Okay. An improvement in terms of trade may be beneficial to an economy. So first we'll start off by writing the benefits of terms of trade, and then we'll move on to a current account surplus benefit. So an improvement in terms of trade may be beneficial to an economy. Why? Because we know that when the terms of trade improves, the country can buy more imports for the same export revenue. Now here the problem is that one of the students wrote that it can buy more imports for the same export revenue. I remember when I was checking this, but then you have to go beyond this. Now what's the benefit of it? What's really the benefit that you're getting? So you need to talk about the benefit, and the benefit is that it will raise the country's purchasing power and improve the living standards, because now you can end up importing more consumer and capital goods, right? And we also know that higher import of capital goods is a good thing because it will benefit your potential economic growth over the long run. That is your long-term economic growth if you're importing more machinery and equipment. So this is actually the benefit. You being able to import more, what is the benefit? The benefit is your living standards will improve. Also, it may also reduce inflationary pressures as imported inflation goes down. Why? Because when terms of trade is improving, and it is improving due to a fall in average import prices. That is your average basket of imports. Whatever your major imports are in the country, whether it's oil or medicines or steel or aluminium, if those average prices are going down, imported inflation will go down. So it will reduce the inflationary pressures if terms of trade improve, but mention why. If it is due to fall in average import prices. Okay? So cheaper imports helps to control domestic inflation. Moreover, a strong TOT may signal global competitiveness and attract FDI, right? So if you have a strong terms of trade, definitely it is a signal that your country is doing well, maybe because your export prices are rising, and a rise in export prices due to a strong demand for exports. I'm sorry, I cannot even understand myself what I'm writing, so I can't expect you guys to understand, but just listen to what I'm saying. A rise in export prices due to a strong demand for exports. So if your export prices are going up, and that is causing terms of trade to improve, but it is due to a very strong demand for exports. That is beneficial for the country. It's a good sign of economic growth. It's a good sign. It represents global competitiveness. It represents that your country is China. It represents China's goods are competitive. And it suggests that China has a strong economy, right? So again, and that is, so a strong export sector reflects strong export-led growth, and that attracts foreign direct investment. Okay, got it? And that's, I think two advantages are enough. However, then you talk about, so I mentioned three. Even if you mentioned two, that would be, but those two should be correct. They shouldn't be vague. Because two advantages, two disadvantages, and then two advantages of current account surplus, and then two would be fine. Okay? So again, it's not really the matter of how many, it's more about whatever it is, then that has to be correct and well explained. Okay? However, an improvement in terms of trade may stem from rising export prices due to, an improvement in terms of trade may stem from rising export prices due to inflation. And the problem here is that if import prices are rising due to inflation, let's say the import prices are rising due to inflation. So if import prices are rising due to inflation, then what will happen is that your terms of trade will improve. But that is not a sign of that is not something to sort of be proud of, because your export prices are going up not because your exports are getting better and people want more of your exports, but because export prices are going up because there's just more inflation in the economy, and that will have a bad impact on your competitiveness of your exports, and it will make your exports less attractive, and it might also have an impact on the balance of trade of the current account, probably causing it to go into a current account deficit or maybe reducing the surplus. Moreover, if demand for exports is price elastic, then higher export prices may again reduce export volume significantly, causing export revenues to fall, worsening the current account. Now, current account worsening could either mean current account deficit or a surplus going down. In both cases, it's bad. So that's the end of story for terms of trade improvement. Now, like I said, you need to talk about the advantages of a current account surplus as well. So what you'll say is that on the other hand, a current account surplus may also bring various economic benefits, such as obviously a strong exports are doing well, so it may boost GDP, and it may also result in higher employment. But again, mention the reason why. Mention the reason why you're saying it. Mention the reason why you're saying that your export prices would sort of go up. I mean, mention why basically your demand for exports would ultimately end up raising output and jobs, right? So basically what you'll say is that it is basically going to result into a strong demand for exports, which will obviously raise the output, and it will raise your employment and will raise your jobs, right? Is it clear till now? Everyone clear? Then you will say that apart from that, it also has an impact on the foreign exchange reserves, because obviously you have a current account surplus. You have a current account surplus that will definitely have an impact on the foreign exchange reserves. Your foreign exchange reserves would go up, and remember that whenever foreign exchange reserves goes up, what is the benefit of a rising foreign exchange reserves? It helps to maintain currency value. Later on, if the currency's value is, let's say, going down, it's weakening, then those reserves can be used to stabilize the currency value, right? So it also improves foreign reserves, and it helps improve currency stability, obviously. And apart from that as well, your currency automatically becomes more stable. If your exports are rising and you have a current account surplus, it will bring up the currency value. It will make your currency's value stable. Yahan pe there's no need to write it appreciates the currency. Don't say appreciation of a currency value. Why? Because you want to make it sound like a benefit. So a benefit way to make it sound like is that you say it makes the currency value stable again. ठीक है, because obviously surplus देखिए, if you see in my answer, everything I am providing a reason. If I'm saying this happens, then why this happens. This is what you need to do in a 12 marker. If you say this happens, then why. And currency stability, as surplus inflows strengthen the currency, improving macroeconomic stability. That is the reason why the currency stability, goes up. Then again, you provide the disadvantages of current account surplus. You say that, however, a current account surplus may also have drawbacks. I've provided only 2 drawbacks. That's more than enough. You will say that, for instance, it may reflect over-reliance on exports. For instance, a current account surplus could be a reflection that you're overly relying on exports and your domestic consumption is suffering, in which case living standards will not go up. So you're relying too much on exports, but you have insufficient investments being made in terms of domestic consumption, so that is suffering. Hence, in this case, living standards will not really rise if domestic households are not benefiting from the surplus. So if you're saying that you have a surplus, if your current account is in a surplus, but an average Pakistani in your country is not really benefiting from a current account surplus, he still does not have basic food available, or he can't really buy basic goods, then there's no point. So if domestic consumption is insufficient, then that is something not good. If people cannot benefit from the service, this is how you end up writing it. Plus, a current account surplus, we know, could be inflationary, because rising exports could rise AAD to rise, causing demand for inflationary pressures, and demand for inflationary pressures again have an impact on the cost of living. So this is how you will end your analysis. Now, just a second. Sorry. Okay, back. Okay, so now you need to evaluate, and evaluation mein, what you will write is, in evaluation, what you will say is that under evaluation, you will say that you need to sort of, if you go back to the question, I haven't really formed the evaluation, I'll do it right now. Assess whether improvements in terms of trade or a surplus in the current account or the balance of payment is more beneficial to an economy. So what do you think would be the evaluation here? Yes, guys, what do you think would be the evaluation? What is the right way to sort of, evaluate this answer? So what you'll say is that, let's sort of write it. So you will say that yes. Salam sir, how's everything? Everything is good. Hope you're well. While both current account surplus and TOT improvements could benefit an economy, the TOT benefits are valuable if they reflect genuine competitiveness, or you can say if they're a reflection of competitiveness or falling import prices, but misleading if they arise from inflationary spikes. Spikes means it sort of goes up. While a current account surplus is usually more directly linked to output and employment gains, because obviously current account surplus, in a current account surplus, you'll end up having more output and more jobs. Though not always higher domestic consumption. The relative benefit, now this is where the real evaluation actually starts. The relative benefit depends on the relative benefit depends on the relative benefit would actually depend on the relative benefit would depend on improved terms of trade versus the relative it's just the which one is better, which one is better, as in whether a TOT is better or a current account surplus is better, which one is better would depend on the relative benefits. Which one is better, as in which either terms of trade improvement is better or a current account surplus is better, would depend on the relative benefits of improved TOT versus a current account surplus, which depends on the structure of an economy. Now, what do you really mean by this? See, an economy that is, these Gulf countries, let's say like Saudi Arabia, this is a commodity exporting nation. It exports oil. So if the export prices goes up, obviously the terms of trade for Saudi Arabia will improve. For example, if the world oil prices go up, the commodity prices go up, so terms of trade for Saudi Arabia will improve. So in that case, Saudi Arabia will be able to benefit a lot because it will be able to buy more imports and improve on its economy's welfare from more money. So, so that is going to help boost Saudi Arabia's, Gulf countries' GDP. But at the same time, those economies that do not export commodities like oil, in fact, they export manufacturing goods like, I don't know, maybe equipment or medical equipment or equipment of any sort, or goods simply. So those manufacturing economies would benefit more when you have a current account surplus rather than a terms of trade surplus, because those countries would reflect that your because a current account surplus would help those countries more because it will help their export sector to grow. But for a country like Saudi Arabia, a terms of trade improvement would help them because it is a commodity exporting nation. Their economy thrives on commodity exports. Their economies thrive and run or are dependent on commodity exports. So for those countries, a rise in the world oil price will immediately boost their TOT, and which will be beneficial for those countries. But for a manufacturing country, export of goods that exports goods, for them a current account surplus would be very much beneficial. इसको लिख लेते हैं. So that is why I am saying structure of the economy. This is what a structure of the economy means. When I say it depends on whether a current account is beneficial or a terms of trade improvement is beneficial, depends upon the structure of the economy. What do I mean by it? What I mean is, it depends on the structure of the economy. I.e., for resource, by the way, even if you skip this, the reason I wrote this was so that I could, this actually made me click the evaluation. Otherwise, I just needed, this was for my own sake. You're not supposed to write this again in the exam. You can directly start off with the evaluation by saying that while both current account surplus in terms of trade improvement have pros and cons, which one is more better or beneficial depends on, you can directly start from here. It depends upon the relative benefits of improved terms of trade versus the current account surplus, depends on the structure of the economy. That is simply which is more. The relative benefits, as in if we compare the benefits of TOT with the current account surplus, and we want to conclude that is this beneficial or that beneficial, and that would depend upon the structure of the economy, right? That's what I'm saying. And the reason I wrote this because I just wanted my mind to start clicking and thinking on those lines, right? So relative benefit of the independent TOT versus the current account surplus depends on the structure of the economy. That is for resource exporting countries like Saudi Arabia, for instance, will gain more from TOT improvements because higher global commodity prices mean it means that they can finance more imports. It means that they can finance more imports with the same volume of exports, directly boosting their national income. While on the other hand, manufacturing based economies like South Korea, like China is a manufacturing based economy, right? Well, on the other hand, manufacturing based economies such as, for instance, China often China benefits a lot from, China has a sustained current account surplus, they often benefit from sustained current account surpluses. Why? Since their economic growth models, which country's growth model are you talking about? We're talking about manufacturing based economies growth model. Since their economic growth model relies on consistently strong export performance. China's growth model relies on consistently strong growth performance. China is dominating world exports throughout the world. We have goods are being imported from China, or China is exporting its goods, right? So the growth model relies on consistent export performance in manufactured goods. Hence, strong of manufactured goods. Hence, maintaining a surplus in current account would support their manufacturing and industrial output and employment, and their long-term competitiveness. Even, guys, you are there, right? You're understanding what all of this. Even if, are you guys there? Even if their terms of trade fluctuates. Could you tell me with a yes or no? Small yes or no could work. So what, if you see what I've written is that China, like Trump says, China. So China is basically exporting. It's an export oriented. Their economy relies on heavy export of manufacturing goods. And what we're saying is not only manufacturing goods but consumer goods as well. But they are major exporters of manufactured goods. They manufacture goods, they export it. And what we're saying is that a country like China would benefit from a current account surplus more. Even if its terms of trade deteriorates, China will not care unless and until it is able to maintain a current account surplus. So yes, a terms of trade improvement is very good for China as well. But even if the terms of trade deteriorate for China, China doesn't care if it is able to maintain a current account surplus, because China's economic structure or the whole economic model or the growth model is based on manufacturing exports. So it is pertinent for China to maintain a current account surplus for long-term competitiveness, for employment, for GDP, and for everything, and for macroeconomic stability. Even if their terms of trade may fluctuate, it's okay for that country. But for a country that is heavily exporting, is reliant on commodity exports like oil, like maybe aluminum, like oil and copper. For such countries, and terms of trade improvement will be very beneficial for them, because commodity prices goes up and down. And if commodity prices are rising, in that case, then the terms of trade improvement would significantly benefit them. Commodities, see, you have to understand, there are not many commodities in the world. There are fewer commodities, and we have very selected commodity exporting nations because of a comparative advantage that they have. Some countries have an absolute advantage as well in commodities. I mean, they naturally oil exists in these Gulf countries, right? So what I'm saying is that, but as far as manufacturing goods are concerned, we have lots and lots of varieties of manufacturing goods. So for a country like China, they would definitely, that is manufacturing it, and they're exporting manufactured items, for them a current account surplus would be very much beneficial. That is what you had to evaluate, because if you see so you could, what you could say is that so what you could say is, hence to conclude, the question was, what was the question? You could say that hence to conclude, the question was assess whether an improvement in the terms of trade would benefit more, right? So you could say that to conclude, both indicators, they are indicators, okay? They are indicators. They are valuable. Both indicators are valuable, but sustainable. But it is very obvious that again, make a judgment. But a sustainable current account surplus, don't say always brings, generally brings, more likely brings, generally brings, more often brings. The moment you say it always brings more benefits, that is where you are going to penalize your marks for a conclusion. More likely, but a sustainable current account balance generally brings more stable. Obviously, current account surplus is the current account itself is a huge indicator. More stable. Terms of trade improvement is not a very stable indicator. Because terms of trade improvement, if terms of trade is improving due to strong domestic demand for exports, then theek hai. But if it is improving because of inflationary pressures, then no. So, but a sustainable current account balance generally brings more stable economic benefits. This is very important line. Sustainable current account surplus, not a temporary surplus. A sustainable current account surplus brings more stable economic benefits. ठीक है? systemic economic benefits, while an improvement in TOT is desirable. We all want an improvement in TOT. It is desirable. I'm not saying beneficial. Desirable. While an improvement in TOT is desirable if it reflects long-term competitiveness, but can be misleading if it is driven by inflation. So क्या लिखा मैंने? What I've written is that to conclude, both indicators are valuable, but a sustainable current account surplus generally brings more stable economic benefits, and while an improved TOT is desirable, and while on the other hand, an improved TOT is desirable if it reflects long-term competitiveness, but can be misleading if driven by inflation. So this is your conclusion basically. So you're saying that ठीक है, fine. You talked about the pros and cons of current account surplus and terms of trade improvement. Then you also talked about that which are the countries that will benefit more, because the question was focusing on whether an improvement is more of a benefit to an economy. So you'll say that, bhai, theek hai, both are beneficial, but to an economy, whether or not depends upon the structure of the economy. If it is a commodity-driven economy, yes, terms of trade improvement will be beneficial for it in the long term, but for a manufacturing-based economy, current account surplus. Then in the end, you conclude that, theek hai, now listen to me, I want to provide a judgment. While a current account surplus is beneficial, you will say that now I want to conclude that both indicators are valuable. It's not the matter of which is more important, which has more preference over others. It's not that, but an improvement or both indicators are valuable. ठीक है, both these indicators are valuable. However, a sustainable current account surplus generally brings more stable economic benefit. जैसे कि मैं आपको बताता हूँ, I'll tell you something. Doing A-levels privately and doing A-levels through college, both are giving the same paper. So both have their own pros and cons. But you can say doing A-levels through a college could bring some more stable benefits. For instance, whatever we are not going to those details, you guys know. But what I'm saying is that this is how, when two things have to be compared, then this should be the mindset in the judgment. You have to wear a separate cap when you are writing an analysis, separate cap for evaluation, separate for conclusion, separate. The mindset shifts because here the comparison has to be made. So don't say, oh, current account surplus is always beneficial. No. Sustainable current account surplus generally brings or more likely brings more stable economic benefit, which is understood. While on the other hand, an improvement in terms of trade is desirable. You're not saying that improvement in terms of trade is not good. It is desirable, but only if it reflects long-term competitive, not short-term competitive, not like a temporary export prices falling. No, long-term competitiveness. Maybe your exports are highly competitive, and because you're structurally well grounded. So that is good, but an improvement in the terms of trade could be misleading if it is driven by inflationary pressures. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Did you understand this? So question 4 was typically pretty easy. So we'll see if you want to solve it in the next live stream. But now next live streams will be in next week. We'll do more past papers. I hope this question was clear. Is it clear? Whoever was watching, make sure that you, because a lot of students watch these streams later on, make sure that you spread these streams to all those who are giving the papers in October, November, because this is what you should be doing right now. You should be revising and you should be doing the past papers. Because remember that what students say is that when they're writing the exams, when they're solving the papers, my words are repeating in their head. Because whatever past papers you do with me in these streams in the last 20 days is what you will remember in the exam on 30th September. Okay, guys, so see you. Thank you so much. And I will see you all next week. Allah Hafiz.